Who will win the Comeback Team of the Year award in 2020? Even though it's not really an award. Let's get it started. Before we get the video started, I know I have a red dot on my head, okay? Just ignore it, alright? Oh, I think it's over here. Just ignore it. Just watch the video. I'm sorry, y'all. So that is the question I'm going to be answering in today's video. And I've seen a lot of other people trying to answer this question, but to me, there's only one team. There's one answer I have. Now, we've seen a lot of teams that have been, you could call the Comeback Team of the Year. I mean, this is not a real award. I mean, we see tons of other awards, personal awards, player awards, coaches awards, but we don't have an award called the Comeback Team of the Year award. That's just not a thing, right? But there is a thing called the Comeback Player of the Year award, where we've seen Ryan Tannehill, Andrew Luck, Keenan Allen. We've seen Matthew Stafford win it in 2011, and sometimes those teams have, kind of a really good season, and that's why they're recognized, but also sometimes they're not impactful enough to kind of change what their team's outcome is. And because of that, it's not really a thing that there's a Comeback Team of the Year award, but maybe it could be at some point. However, there's tons of examples to look at year by year. There are a ton of examples year by year. Some are greater than the others, but if you look, I mean, even just last season, the San Francisco 49ers, they went from 3-13 to a Super Bowl team. You look at 2004, the Chargers, they went from 4-12 to 12-4. In 2006, the Saints, they went from 3-13 to an NFC Championship game. The Eagles, who won a Super Bowl with a backup quarterback after coming off a 6-win season. And then the Patriots, Drew Bledsoe goes down, Tom Brady steps in, all of a sudden they're good. We've seen this all the time where a team comes out of nowhere and it's unexpected, but all of a sudden they start winning games. And a lot of people believe it's going to be that young quarterback emerging. It's going to be that young guy that everybody's excited about. He's got all these weapons and he's going to go out there and ball out, and all of a sudden they're going to be the Comeback Team of the Year. However, that is possible and it does happen sometimes. It's not every single time. Sometimes it's just a veteran who has everything around him start to kind of click, whether it's running game, defense, whatever it may be. Everything kind of starts to come together because they're maybe more proven, or they've shown you that they can do it. So to look at the young quarterbacks, it's kind of hit or miss, right? Because sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. A lot of teams I've seen recently are the Denver Broncos, Arizona Cardinals, Miami Dolphins, simply because, they got a young quarterback. Drew Lock, he's got all these weapons to go to. Arizona Cardinals, they got Kyler Murray. Miami Dolphins, they just got Tua. All these young teams, right? All these young teams, young quarterbacks, they're all exciting, and, they could emerge and they could be great, which can happen. But there is another team that has a veteran quarterback that I believe will be the Comeback Team of the Year in 2020 for various reasons. Let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the San Francisco 49ers are a team that I brought up just recently as probably the most recent Comeback Team of the Year because it was last season. And it was a crazy, crazy comeback. I mean, this team just came out of nowhere. So it's super impressive to see what they went through and what they accomplished. And the reason I'm talking about the San Francisco 49ers is because the team I'm comparing them to, which is the Detroit Lions, who I believe will be the Comeback Team of the Year in 2020, they fit really, really well and they have a lot of things in common, so it just makes sense to compare them. For example, the San Francisco 49ers in 2018 went 4-12, Detroit Lions went 3-12-1. So, I mean, that's pretty similar on its own. But it's not just that, not just record. I mean, put that aside for a second. Look at what they went through in 2018, how they became the worst team and how they became maybe the best team or one of the best teams in the league. Well, in 2018, they had a couple of problems. Their first problem were injuries, and injuries are something that always can derail a season, especially when it's your quarterback, your franchise quarterback, and your starting running back. Those two things are huge, right? The San Francisco 49ers in 2018 lost their starting quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo, who had high expectations to kind of pull everything together, and Jerick McKinnon, who was their starting running back. Well, compare that to the Lions, who in 2019 lost Matthew Stafford for half the season, lost every game without him, and their starting running back once again in Kerryon Johnson. But don't just stop there. I mean, you could look on the defensive side of the ball if you want to, and there were tons of injuries there. Lions had tons of guys on IR, but we're not going to talk about that. We'll just talk about those two specific injuries between the quarterback and the running back. Those two injuries are very, very important. Also, what else did the San Francisco 49ers have in common with the Detroit Lions? Well, blowing leads. Look, this is something that we see a lot of times. Blowing leads happens all the time in sports, and usually it's because, a team doesn't have players that can put away a game. And, I mean, is it always coaching? Is it players? I think it's a mix of both, but a lot of times it's because they don't have the players that can put it away. You never heard of a clutch? You ever heard of a clutch player? That's where those players come in, and you need to have those guys on your team, and the Detroit Lions maybe had those guys. The San Francisco 49ers maybe had those guys, but instead they were on the bench. They were injured. They couldn't come into the game, so they couldn't help out, close out games. For example, the San Francisco 49ers, they didn't have their starting quarterback, so how's he going to close out a game? They didn't have their starting running back to help run out a game. When you look at the Lions, they didn't have their starting quarterback. That's why they lost every game without him. They didn't have their starting running back to help run out games. That's just something that both these teams went through, and it's one of the main reasons they lost as many games they did. I mean, at one point, the San Francisco 49ers were putting out articles talking about how this team just cannot finish off a game. They just can't do it. They keep losing. They're just losing here constantly. And I'm showing you on the screen, they just keep losing, and every time the bottom line is well, you're playing with a backup quarterback. You're not playing with Jimmy Garoppolo. And then when you look at the lines, you can go look up the lines. You can just Google search it out, lines below leads. If you look in 2019, we're talking through December, there's articles being written on how the Detroit Lions led in every single game. Every single game. Think about this for a second. The Kansas City Chiefs are 8-4. The 49ers, 10-2. Detroit Lions are 3-8-1. All of those teams have in common, the only 3 teams in the NFL, they all led in every single game up to that point. Every single game the Lions led up to that point, and they were 3-8-1 compared to 8-4 and 10-2. Well, what was the reason? Just like the Niners, they didn't have their starting quarterback to close out games. Now, their defense was a big problem, and that's what's even, to me, that's even more, like, oh, wow, this team could really be the comeback team of the year, because while their defense was completely awful, they still had opportunities to be a pretty competitive team, especially if Stafford was there. Most people would probably say the Lions could have at least won 7 games if Stafford was healthy. They were 3-4-1 with him, and one of those losses came on the 1-yard line with an awful defense. Some people will come out and say, okay, well, hold up. Here's the difference between the Lions and the Niners. Well, the 49ers, they had a good defense. They had a good defense in 2018. They just didn't have a starting quarterback. That's the difference. Lions didn't. But while that may be partway true, as the Detroit Lions didn't have a good defense, neither did the San Francisco 49ers. If you simply look at rankings, the 49ers defense was not very good. The 49ers ranked 28th in points allowed, which was actually worse than what the Detroit Lions ranked in 2019 because they gave up basically a half a point less. The Lions did. They ranked 19th against the run, 11th against the pass, which is actually not too bad, 22nd in sacks, and last in the league in interceptions. They weren't a good defense, but neither were the Detroit Lions. The Lions ranked 26th in points allowed, 21st against the run, last in the league against the pass, 29th in sacks, and 30th in interceptions. Both of these teams, they just couldn't put it together defensively. You know what's crazy to me? The San Francisco 49ers in 2018 had 2 interceptions. On the entire season, 2 interceptions, all right? If that doesn't explain to you, like, I know some schemes and strategies don't call for a lot of interceptions. The Lions probably won't ever have too many interceptions because of the defense they play, which is mainly man-to-man. It's just not a interception defense. I learned that from Glover Quinn, so there you go. Look at the Lions. They're not going to have tons of interceptions, but 2 interceptions is pretty darn bad. I think that's kind of like, okay, I don't care what defense you're playing. 2 interceptions just kind of shows me you weren't very good. So both defenses were bad. Both teams didn't have their starting quarterback or starting running back, and their records just kind of plummeted. Both of these teams had terrible records. Both of these teams just could not get anything going. Both these teams finished with top 3 picks in the draft. The 49ers finished with the 2nd pick in the draft. The Lions finished with the 3rd. If the Lions would have got the 2nd, it would have been wild because in the 2nd pick in the draft, the San Francisco 49ers selected Nick Bosa, the pass rusher out of Ohio State, which is really interesting because if the Lions would have had the 2nd pick in the draft, they could have selected Chase Young, a pass rusher out of Ohio State, which would have been wild. But they did take a cornerback, still out of Ohio State, at the 3rd pick in their draft. So both these teams got a top pick that's going to help an immediate impact day number 1. Now, Nick Bosa is a huge reason that this team turned it around. Not the sole reason, but he's a very, very big reason because he makes such a big impact, just like Jeffrey Okudah should with the Detroit Lions. They had the worst passing defense in the league, and they added the top corner in the draft. We know they traded away Darius Slay, but a lot of people will simply look at it and say, well, he's Darius Slay. He's not good. He's really, really good. Their defense has got worse. But statistically, Darius Slay was probably coming off the worst season. It wasn't completely awful. It wasn't good, but a lot of that had to do with, we didn't get a lot of pressure. And what's interesting about that is in 2018, we've actually seen the Lions defense thrive. We saw in 2018 the team that finished top 10 defensively. So what was the difference? Why did they go from top 10 to one of the worst in the league? They didn't have that interior defensive line presence. And the defense that Matt Patricia and Bill Belichick and those guys run, defensive line is important because you don't blitz a lot of guys. You don't bring a lot of guys. So you need that interior defensive lineman to hold his own, whether that's rotation, whatever it may be. In 2018, the Lions brought in Snacks Harrison to fill out that role. They knew what they needed. They brought him in, and he filled out the role tremendously, and that's why they were one of the top defenses. However, in 2018, Snacks Harrison was a complete letdown. He did not play up to his level or capabilities. He was really, really bad. 30 less tackle and only 1 less game. He was just not the same player whatsoever. He wasn't getting any kind of push. It was just nothing. There was nothing from the interior defensive line. And then you have cornerbacks who were just out there on an island who weren't very good anyways. Darius Slay didn't want to be here. Rashawn Melvin was a solid veteran, but just an okay number 2. You had a rookie in Amani and Justin Coleman, who was a new addition. Overall, you just had a complete mess last season. So the Lions, San Francisco 49ers, both had a very bad defense, but the Niners were able to fix it. They brought in Nick Bosa, right? They got the nice pass rusher. And for you to see, they added some other pass rushers. They were able to fix their defense. They changed their scheme up a little bit. Then they had their veteran, Richard Sherman, who went and had his best season of possibly his career. Best season of his career at his age. Very similar, you may say, to the Detroit Lions, who brought in Desmond Trufant, who was also coming off an injury for another veteran, and they brought in the top cornerbacks. So all of a sudden, the Lions, it looks like their strength is that secondary. All of a sudden, it went from being the worst, now it could potentially be their biggest strength as a team. And we've seen offensively that the Lions can win games. So the thing is, when you look at these young quarterbacks and you say, well, if they emerge, if they become this with their weapons, this is how great they can be. The thing is, the Lions have a quarterback that's already shown how great he can be with weapons. He's already shown you he can be just one of the best quarterbacks in the league if you give him weapons. And now you have him weapons again. I mean, we saw last season, halfway through the year, with less weapons, this team had the most passing yards per game. They would have had the most passing yards per game if you probably would have played the entire season. And they also averaged over 25 points per game. This offense was rolling, okay? It was rolling until Matthew Stafford got hurt. It was really the defense that was hurting them, and that's because it was just a complete mess between injuries and players and age and everything just kind of, not playing up to their level that we were expecting. It was kind of a letdown. But the great thing about both the Niners and the Lions and that they can benefit from is that they both finished really bad, but it's mainly because they didn't have their starting quarterback, right? The Lions could have won 7 games, and all of a sudden they're picking, 10, 11. That's way different than picking 3, right? That's a huge difference because not only is that for the first round, that's for every round. The Lions wouldn't have gotten possibly the top running back in the draft in DeAndre Swift. They may have not gotten possibly a first-round talent in Julian Okwara. Some of those things may not be available if you're not picking that high, and because of those injuries, it could turn out to be a blessing in disguise because it actually could work out for the Lions just like it worked out for the San Francisco 49ers. There's similarities, and the reason I'm picking the Lions over picking these young teams is because I've seen both the defense under Matt Patricia thrive, and I've seen also the offense with Matthew Stafford and his new offense coordinator, Darrell Bevel. That's one of the reasons they weren't good in 2018. They had the wrong offense coordinator. Now you got the right offense coordinator who was just great with Matthew Stafford. I mean, we've seen both the things work. We've seen the defense work at one point. We've seen the offense work at one point, but they were years apart. They were separated by 1 year in between. But now you put those together, you add more weapons, you have a rejuvenated offensive line. This team has the opportunity, has the ability to be the comeback team of the year into 2020, and that is my pick for the comeback team of the year. NFL, if you're doing awards, start it this year because the Lions are going to have it. Let me hear your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching.